It's time, Cougar Nation. Cougar Tracks. The best season analysis with BYU insider Mitch Harper on KSL NewsRadio and on video every day on the YouTube page for KSL Sports.
Welcome into Cougar Tracks here on the KSL Sports YouTube and KSL News Radio, your legacy home of the Cougars. I am your BYU insider, Mitch Harper. It's Monday, January 5th, 2026. Happy New Year to all of you. I think this is the day that's the cutoff on saying Happy New Year to everyone, but hopefully it was a happy and safe New Year for everyone out there. Excited to kick things off with 2026 here on Cougar Tracks. Had a little bit of a break, back, ready to roll and tackle this thing every single day as you've grown accustomed to this year with Cougar Tracks. And this time of the year is always exciting because there's so much to really get to with BYU basketball's rolling right now, but also, of course, BYU football, which never sleeps. And that's our top story of the day.
The top story of the day. The biggest story in the world of BYU sports right here on Cougar Tracks.
The pieces are coming together for BYU football in 2026. We know, of course, that BYU is going to have a new defensive coordinator this season. Jay Hill officially with the Michigan Wolverines. Alongside with him, Jernaro Gilford, longtime BYU football assistant. He follows Jay Hill to Ann Arbor to coach up the defensive backs on Kyle Whittingham's staff for the Maize and Blue. Gilford's the last coach that exits from Kalani Sitake's original staff back in 2016. Excellent coach. He's going to be doing good things at Michigan, but what's of note with Gilford leaving is that an internal candidate goes off the board in who becomes the next defensive coordinator. And when you hear interviews like Gary Anderson with the KSL Sports Zone last week with Hans and Scotty G talking about the foundation that is in place with this defense and the talent that's on this coaching staff, it makes you wonder if BYU goes internal to replace Jay Hill. Could it be Kelly Papinga, someone along those lines to fill that spot left by Jay Hill, who was an excellent coach? The good news, though, for BYU, a lot of players, even despite the exit of Jay Hill to Michigan, they have made it clear they are running it back in 2026. And of note, Keanu Tanavasa, defensive tackle, he hinted at that after the Pop-Tarts Bowl in his post-game radio interview, but he made it clear he's not done yet. He's coming back in 2026 for his senior season. Probably the biggest announcement in the Run It Back series of announcements, safety Falatau Satuwala, who you would have thought that Jay Hill would have loved to have had come to Michigan. A second-team All-American was Falatau this season. He made it clear he's coming back to BYU, and what a huge boost to get Falatau Satuwala the day that Jay Hill's announced by Michigan. Hours later, Satuwala makes it clear he's running it back at BYU. Also, the number one wide receiver this past season, Parker Kingston. He's returning for BYU in 2026. Those are probably the most notable players running it back, but also Therian, Trey Alexander, cornerback, outside edge, linebacker, Nusi Talmoy-Peau, Raider Mooney, who's likely going to be that safety running mate with Falatau Satuwala on the back end of the defense. Andrew Gentry, offensive tackle. Could we see him switch from the right side of the offensive line to the left side? It's been a common practice for BYU offensive lines in recent years. Wouldn't shock me in the slightest. Getting him back is a big deal. Linebacker Sialia Serra, likely the starting inside linebacker for the Cougars. He is going to be an excellent player. Already is. Only going to get better in his BYU career. Other guys that have announced that they're coming back in 2026, Anisi Purcell, Bruce Mitchell, Kyle Safarachok, and Sonny Makasini. We're still waiting on, well, I hate to say we're waiting on announcements because unless you enter the portal, we shouldn't need announcements. But in this era of uneasiness in fan bases when the portal is open, and that's currently where we're at right now with January 5th. There's still 11 days to go in this one and only portal window, the fan bases get a little uneasy. And to get some public announcements of, hey, don't worry, I'm not leaving, it's always kind of a peace of mind deal for the fan base. Players that I think it'd be well served to announce they're running it back is Evan Johnson, cornerback, Shmev, who had an excellent season this past year. 5 interceptions for Evan Johnson. Does he follow Jernaro Gilford, or does he go into the portal and maybe look at his value potentially? Be nice to see Shmev make a public announcement if he's running it back with BYU. Other guys, of course, running back LJ Martin. You know, he's got a decision whether it's the NFL or running it back to BYU. Look, there's other guys, though, around the country that have said, I'm going to go to the NFL draft process, like Raleek Brown of Arizona State. Then he goes into the portal. It'd just be nice if LJ makes it clear and says, hey, I'm running it back for one final season with the Cougars. Linebacker Isaiah Glasker as well. Glasker had a praying hands emoji tweet the day that Jay Hill was announced, and clearly Jay Hill had a great impact on Isaiah Glasker's career. Does Glasker go to the NFL? Does he consider maybe following Jay Hill to Michigan? He's an intriguing one to watch. And then some other players like a Hunter Clegg, a young offensive lineman like Andrew Williams, players like that have bright futures ahead in their BYU career that wouldn't shock me in the slightest. If they entered the portal, they would have a lot of Power 4 interest. Those would be some other guys too. I think also, of course, quarterback Bear Bachmeier. Make it clear he's running it back. But again, it's a double-edged sword in this era of college football, because I really don't want to hear that someone's re-signing or running it back. If you're not in the portal, you're back. But again, we know that tampering happens clearly in this sport, and there's so much talking taking place, and just again brings peace of mind to fans when they see these notable players announcing they're running it back. And one guy that's not going to be running it back, but he was big time for BYU football, was Tanner Wall, and it was cool to see Tanner at the Sugar Bowl getting honored with the Good Works team down in Louisiana at the Sugar Bowl last week at the college football playoff quarterfinal game, Ole Miss and Georgia. That was a classic. He got to see that one firsthand, but he was on DJ and PK on Monday on the KSL Sports Zone, and he was asked if he was the BYU football president, who would he task as the next defensive coordinator? Would he go internal or go on the outside? And this was Tanner Wall on his thoughts.
Well, it's a good thing I'm not the president making that choice, but I really do feel a lot of confidence knowing the coaches that we have on the defensive side of the ball. I think there's a lot of guys who could do that job extremely well. Gary Anderson's a name that's been thrown around a ton in recent days and weeks. And the value that he's added at BYU too has to be recognized. I think he's kind of one who flies under the radar quite a bit to fans and others who maybe don't really understand the level of involvement that he has, just because it seems to be somewhat of a backseat role. But he's very much in the day-to-day and helping us really dial our scheme. And Coach Kelly Papinga is another one who has had a lot of on his plate with being our special teams coordinator, and has done an incredible job doing that. And I could see him as well being someone who could play a huge role as a play caller. But even Kalani, if he wanted to, be more of a guy with a play sheet in his hand on game day, I could see him doing that. But there's a lot of, as you said, that coaching staff, because they're day in, day out doing this and they've been learning it and feel comfortable with it. There's a lot of them who know that scheme, understand it. We can put our own, spin on it as far as where we want to take it, but it's gonna be there. If it's an internal hire, then it's going to continue to look a lot like what it looks like right now.
Good stuff there from former BYU safety Tanner Wall. Weird to say that. Former BYU safety Tanner Wall. But all of these moves with running it back and the options that Kalani Sitake has in filling that defensive coordinator spot and keeping these guys despite a significant coaching change when a lot of people would say Jay Hill is the brains behind all of the success, it shows that Kalani Sitake is the reason for the culture and why BYU signed that long-term extension with Kalani, why it was so important to hold off Penn State and keep Kalani Sitake in the fold. But a good building block and start for BYU's 2026 offseason. Let's take a break. We'll get to BYU basketball news around the corner as the Cougars start Big 12 playoff with a great win on the road at Kansas State. You're listening to Cougar Tracks. It's powered by KSL Sports. Welcome back into Cougar Tracks here on the KSL Sports YouTube page. Every day, Cougar Tracks is coming to you live with the latest news and analysis and insight into the world of BYU athletics. You can check it out on the KSL Sports YouTube, KSLSports.com, and wherever you get your audio podcasts. Be much appreciated. Start the new year off right. If you're a loyal listener, give a 5-star rating and a review. It would help out the show a ton on all of the audio podcast platforms, and give a thumbs up to this video on YouTube as well. So I wanted to dive into something here, looking back at the 2025 BYU football season. What went right? What went wrong? And far too often with how college football off seasons work now, it feels like there's no time to actually breathe and absorb what took place the most recent year. We just start to move into 2026, as you heard in the previous segment, already talking about building blocks for 2026 and beyond. And we don't really unpack what just happened this past season, where BYU had a memorable season, 12-2, reached the Big 12 championship game, won a bowl game in the Pop-Tarts Bowl. It was an outstanding year for BYU. But even in outstanding years, there's always areas where you can improve, but there's also some real highlights as well. And that's why I wanted to break down what went right and what went wrong. What went right? Bear Bachmeier, the star quarterback, true freshman, stepped in at BYU in June and became the Big 12 freshman offensive player of the year and was sensational. He was probably one of the best quarterbacks in the Big 12. He might be returning one of the best Big 12 quarterbacks next season. You know, Brendan Sorsby's going to go to Texas Tech. You've got the transfer from North Texas going to Oklahoma State in that system with Morris as the head coach. But Bear Bachmeier could be, one or two best quarterbacks in the Big 12 next season. He was brilliant. And that's a credit to Aaron Roderick, Kalani Sitake, giving the belief to Bear Bachmeier, because with a true freshman, it could be easy to be uncomfortable with turning to him on such late notice when the season was kind of given to Jake Retzloff, and Bear Bachmeier was brilliant. That went right for BYU. An area that went wrong, well, offense against Texas Tech. Bear Bachmeier's probably two worst games this season. The only games where he struggled mightily was against Texas Tech. And look, Texas Tech had an absolute dud of a performance in the Orange Bowl. That defense, though, was still elite. I mean, it was only 16-0, two-possession game in theory. They were doing everything possible to let that offense have a pulse of any kind. Texas Tech's defense is outstanding. They were great this year, and they're not slowing down. You saw that D2 defensive end that could potentially be the next David Bailey, who they added a couple months ago out of the portal. Texas Tech's going to be really good, but those 2 days against the Red Raiders were not pretty, and it ultimately cost BYU a playoff spot. Another area that went right, retaining Kalani Sitake. Keeping Kalani Sitake was vital to the success of this BYU football program, not only in 2025, but long-term. Because Kalani Sitake staying, big deal for the Cougars, and that was something that went right, because it also highlights, too, that BYU football is willing to compete at the highest levels of the sport. Kalani Sitake is the one man that broke through and has been able to get the leadership at BYU, the church, to invest at levels never before thought of. And maybe it's part of the climate of college football today that helped this as well. But still, it's pretty remarkable, the level of investment that's being given to BYU football now, and it leads to, I think, a greater future ahead for the program. What went wrong this season? Special teams took a dip. Last year, they were S&P Plus ratings, number 4 best special teams unit in the country. This year, 47th. Massive dip. They still had that punt return for a touchdown with Parker Kingston. Will Farron was not as accurate as he was a season ago. He had 7 missed field goals. There were some turnovers on special teams this year. There were some miscues. It just wasn't as flawless. I mean, 2024 special teams was brilliant. I mean, they were scoring, felt like every single week that unit was producing points and impact plays for BYU in that 11-win season. That group took a little bit of a step back. What went right? LJ Martin, Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year. What can you say about LJ? I mean, the 9th single season, the 7th highest single season rushing output in BYU football history. He's now 9th in career rushing yards in BYU football history. That's why I would love to see LJ run it back one more year, become truly one of the all-time great running backs in BYU football history. He produced one of the greatest seasons we've ever witnessed by a running back in BYU history when you factor in the competition, the strength of schedule, the week in, week out grind, and that he navigated maybe that pain in the shoulder and still put up some massive numbers. Impressive season for LJ. But if he runs it back, he could become one of the all-time greats in BYU football history. What went wrong? Digging holes for themselves with double-digit deficits. BYU had 5 comebacks this season where they faced a double-digit deficit. This next season, avoid that. Do not dig yourself in a hole where you're on a random road game in the Big 12, say Colorado, and you're suddenly facing a 14-0 deficit. That's not the blueprint to winning every single week in this league. Now, it worked. It was okay. 5 wins. They were able to overcome, which is great. But still, that is not a long-term recipe for always winning. I mean, granted, BYU has had a little bit of the Midas touch the past few years, but that's something that's got to get fixed. What went right? The sacks arrived. BYU had 30 sacks this season, good for 61st nationally, an average of 2.14 per game. Now, you hear 61st nationally, you're thinking, that's not that good. That's middle of the road in college football. But considering where it's been, big step in the right direction. Jack Kelly was outstanding. He had 10 of those sacks. First BYU player, as crazy as this sounds, first BYU player since Bronson Kafusi in 2015 to have a double-digit sack season, first in the Kalani Sitake era. It's not a glowing endorsement of the Kalani Sitake era, but someone finally broke through, and that was Jack Kelly. What went wrong? Not winning the Big 12. Look, they exceeded expectations. I didn't expect them to be in the Big 12 championship game when you lose your starting quarterback in the middle of the summer. But still, when you get to that game, the Big 12 title, you got to capitalize. And they missed out on the opportunity. People in the building believed that they could win the Big 12. There was no shortage of belief from the building for BYU. But so in that sense, that went wrong. They didn't win the league. What went right? Final thing, sending Kyle Whittingham out with a 3-game losing streak in the rivalry. How about that? When you think about that, Kyle Whittingham goes off to Ann Arbor, Michigan. And look, he had a lot of wins over BYU. He had 9 straight, for goodness sake. But BYU sends Whittingham out with a 3-game skid in the rivalry, a game that meant a lot to him. I think that's something you got to highlight and say that went right for BYU. And now I would say Utah fans might get on board and celebrate that too. They don't seem to like the man either anymore. Final timeout. We'll get to the Cougar Stock Exchange next with BYU Basketball as the Cougars move up in the top 25 rankings. It's Cougar Tracks here on KSL Sports. Welcome back into Cougar Tracks here on KSL News Radio, your legacy home of the Cougars and the KSL Sports YouTube page. Mitch Harper here with you. BYU Basketball moved up in the AP Top 25 poll today. Finally, after weeks being at number 10, they finally move up one spot to number 9 in the AP Top 25 poll, fresh off a victory over Kansas State, 83-73, and that leads us to our Monday staple here on the program, the Cougar Stock Exchange.
The Cougar Stock Exchange. What's trending up and what's trending down? It's the Cougar Stock Exchange.
So trending up for BYU basketball as the Cougars are now on a 10-game win streak. Longest win streak for BYU hoops since 2011. A special year. It's always fun to reference the season that involved one James Taft Fredette, Jimmer Fredette. But trending up the front court, BYU has two legit centers that are rim protectors that can alter shots. Keba Keita, you know about him, and what a performance he had. 11 points, 16 boards in only 27 minutes of action. Keba Keita was everywhere. The man who took over the other 13 minutes, Abdullah Ahmed Bidu, the G League import who joins midseason. Look, he's still kind of getting his feet under him, the way that he was moving a little bit. I'm sure there's still a case of trying to figure things out offensively and even defensively. But he's got a natural ability to make plays and alter shots. And that is a nice luxury because Keba Keita is so unique in his skill set to even have the thought that you can kind of maintain that level of production with him on the bench. What a luxury for this BYU team. And I think you saw that with Abdullah Ahmed having some success. He had 3 blocks in that win over K-State. Trending up, stronger starts. I thought BYU, a little bit of a slow start. Little bit. I say that lightly. But I thought by all accounts, BYU started pretty well on the road after a long layoff in the holiday break. I thought the slow start concern kind of got erased a bit in that win over Kansas State. Trending down the turnovers, BYU had 19 turnovers in that game against K-State, 7 of which came from AJ Dybantsa. But despite those 7 turnovers, AJ is still trending up. And in large part, too, because of what we're seeing in college basketball. AJ finishes with 24 points in the win over K-State in a game where, Jerome Tang and Kansas State, they recruited AJ heavily. He took an official visit. I mean, heck, they had a grocery store in Manhattan where they had displays saying, "Welcome AJ to Manhattan." They rolled out all the stops to try to get him to K-State, but ultimately he signed with BYU. But I think what makes AJ trend up even more than he already has to this point is that he's available. He's immersing himself in BYU. You look at what's happening at Kansas. Darren Peterson, the preseason Big 12 Freshman Player of the Year. Darren Peterson's only played in 5 games this year for Kansas, and he's finished only one of those games. Kansas over the weekend lost to UCF on the road, and UCF now, top 25 team. Their lone loss is to Vanderbilt, who's undefeated. UCF's a pretty good squad. No shame in that setback if you're Kansas, but still Darren Peterson, the heralded freshman who might be the one guy that could unseat AJ from the number 1 NBA draft pick next June, he's barely playing. He's a walking bucket when he's on the floor. He had 26 points against UCF, Darren Peterson did, but he didn't play the final 10 minutes. Whether that was due to a minutes restriction, hamstring, whatever it is. He's been dealing with a hamstring issue in recent weeks. It's caused him to be unavailable, but I think it's just nice for BYU that they've got a superstar recruit and prospect that is part of the team. And AJ loves to facilitate, and there's not these sideshow distractions. And look, I don't know if it's because of Darren Peterson. I don't know. There doesn't seem to be much transparency at all from what's going on with that situation. Bill Self's had some comments in that post game against UCF, but still, there's a new, even greater appreciation for the way that AJ has gone about his business this season. It's been really impressive because when you get superstar talents like AJ, a type of player that BYU has never got, you kind of wondered how is that going to work in the locker room? Well, I think it's worked out masterfully, and I think BYU is benefiting greatly because AJ is so good. He's so efficient. He's the nation's leading scorer right now, averaging 23.1 points per game. And he gets his 24 points, and it feels like, wow, how did he get that? I mean, it didn't take a bunch of chucking to get that 24 points. It's very efficient. He was 8 of 15 from the field against K-State. And he picks his spots, he knows where to go, and then he can rise up and elevate. And look, he wasn't even getting the benefit of the whistle. In non-conference play, there were many games where AJ was getting the whistle and going to the line. He still had 10 free throw attempts against K-State, but the physicality of the Big 12, they were letting a little bit slide, and I thought he adjusted great. And he still played a significant number of minutes, and he's been outstanding for BYU. I mean, there were high expectations for AJ. Out of this world expectations. Dare I say he's lived up to every bit of those expectations and then some. He's better than advertised for BYU. He's gotten better in college than he was in high school, and that's exciting for what he's going to be eventually in the NBA and beyond. He's the number 1 NBA draft pick. There's no doubt in my mind. I mean, this freshman class is elite in college basketball this year, and most of it centers in the Big 12, but AJ is a step above the rest, and he is trending up for BYU. Cougs going to take on Arizona State coming up on Wednesday. Tip-off at 7 p.m. right here on KSL. Pre-game at 6 here on the legacy home of the Cougars. That's going to do it for this edition of Cougar Tracks. I'll be back tomorrow with more BYU football and basketball talk here on the legacy home of the Cougars, KSL News Radio, and the KSL Sports YouTube page.